A guy reincarnates into another world, awakening a powerful ability called water manipulation. A skill that doesn't just make water his domain, but also lets him tame fierce aquatic beasts, turning them into his loyal pets. But he doesn't stop there. As he evolves them, pushing them past their natural limits until they become terrifying sea monsters. Now let's dive in. The story takes place in a distant land, where Liang Ku stood dazed, taking in the breathtaking view of the rising sun. The golden light painted the sky, and the fresh, cold breeze of the morning filled his lungs. It was peaceful, almost surreal. But before he could fully lose himself in the moment, his father's voice called out to him, snapping him back as if it were a sound he hadn't heard in years. Yet, despite that, it felt familiar, warm, comforting. Without a second thought, he rushed to his father, determined to make the most of the day. They spent the morning on the lake, checking on the fish they had caught. It was like any other day, but it was fun. Probably the most fun he had in a long time. Like how a crab managed to latch onto his foot, his father nearly choking on their food from laughing too hard, and even leaving some carved scribbles on the side of their boat just for the hell of it. It was simple, but it was enough to make him forget everything else. He hadn't even realized how quickly time passed until the sun was already setting. But before heading back with their catch, they decided to sit by the shore and enjoy the view a little longer. That was when he noticed a red carp swimming by, its scales glimmering under the fading sunlight. It was a rare sight, and so without hesitation, Liang Qiu dived into the water. But the moment he hit the surface, fish was gone and everything around him. The lake was empty with no signs of life, and no matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't move forward, like something was holding him in place. And suddenly his chest tightened, his limbs grew heavier, and the only thing on his mind was hoping his father would pull him out. But the world around him dimmed, and just like that he woke up. Except his father wasn't there. Instead, two strangers stood in front of him, and that's when reality hit. The day with his father was all just a dream. In truth, he was tied up, captured by these bastards. Zhang had tricked him, making him believe he was guiding them. But in reality, they just wanted to use him as bait for the water monster. A cruel fate, but Liang Ku remained calm. Because this wasn't his first life, Liang Qiu was a transmigrator from another world. It had already been a month since he arrived in this world, taking over this body. The original owner had died from an illness, and somehow he ended up here in his place. His mother died in childbirth, leaving him to be raised by his father alone. And for years, it was just the two of them, until 3 months ago, when his father succumbed to a respiratory disease. But now, all those emotions, the grief, the loneliness and the longing, had become his own, and that was something new for him, as he had never known what it felt like to grow up with a family. Still, in the past month, he had adapted to the former owner's relationships and daily life. He had also discovered something else. This world wasn't normal. It possessed extraordinary powers. People here could train their bodies and minds to reach incredible states, surpassing human limits. Those who succeeded were called cultivators. But it wasn't just humans who could evolve through training. Animals could too. And those who did were known as mythical beasts. And speaking of the devil, one had just appeared, right below them. Even Zhang, a seasoned cultivator, felt his legs go weak the moment he laid eyes on it. He had expected the water beast to be about 1/2 meter long, but it turns out the info was all wrong. And the moment it surfaced, it easily rocked the boat, sending ripples of panic through everyone on board. Still, Zhang wasn't the type to go down without a fight. He had trained for 10 years, and if this thing wanted to swallow them whole, it would have to work for it. So the second the beast lunged closer, he went all in, unleashing his strongest move to meet it halfway. But motherfucker was huge. Its jaws alone were bigger than him, and before he could even process what was happening, he was gone, swallowed whole like a bite-sized snack, and the boat shattered into pieces in the process. And so the old guy was absolutely panicking. He never planned to die here. This wasn't part of the script. But the way things were going, he needed a plan, and fast. And that's when the bright idea hit him. So without hesitation, he stabbed our boy's hand and shoved him straight into the water, hoping the blood would serve as a distraction. And because Liang Qiu was still tied up, his body sank straight down, dragged by the weight of his restraints. But he wasn't going down without a fight. He thrashed against the ropes and then bited. His teeth clamped down hard, tearing at the rough fibers. It wasn't easy, but after a few agonizing moments, the ropes loosened just enough for him to break free. But now there was another problem. His oxygen was running out, and he had already sunk too deep. His vision blurred, darkness creeping in at the edges, and that's when visions started appearing again. His father's arm extended toward him, And though Liang Qiu knew it wasn't real, his body moved on instinct, reaching out. And that's when his hand found something solid. It was a log, the same log from his father's boat, the one they had carved their faces into all those years ago. A rush of emotions hit him all at once. Gratitude, relief, even a small bit of warmth despite the freezing water around him. Somehow, even in death, his father had saved him once again. But that moment didn't last, because the blood from his wound had already spread, and the monster had caught his scent. Before he could react, sharp teeth clamped onto his leg. The next thing he knew, he was being dragged downward, deeper into the lake. The pressure built up in his chest, and the light from above faded completely as the beast pulled him into the depths of its lair. And what he saw there sent a shiver down his spine. Countless bodies, long since devoured, wrecked boats, shattered into pieces, and treasure, piles of it, glimmering like a cruel joke in the darkness. This was it. He had done everything he could to survive, but it was obvious now. There was no escaping this. So with what little breath he had left, he closed his eyes and whispered a silent apology to his father, because soon he would be joining him. But the water beast was just like cut that shit out and slammed him to the ground, toying with him like a predator playing with its food. Pain shot through his body. But then something happened. His blood, drifting through the water, seeped into the lakebed and touched something ancient, a forgotten treasure buried beneath the wreckage. A water cauldron, and within it, an ancient being stirred. In that moment, power surged through Liang Qiu's body, something foreign yet strangely familiar. It adapted to him, shaping itself into a form he could instinctively understand, something akin to the games he used to play before he transmigrated. A power manifested in the form of a game system, and its primary ability, water manipulation. The change was immediate. The water around him was no longer his enemy, it was his domain. His wounds closed, his body strengthened, and suddenly, it felt as if he was standing on solid ground, as if water resistance no longer existed for him, making him question how any of this was possible. And as if responding to his thoughts, a system notification popped up, explaining everything. He had obtained a skill water control which grants the ability to manipulate water currents, and allows breathing underwater. A powerful skill, one that turned the depths of the lake into his battlefield. But before he could even process his newfound abilities, the beast struck again, lunging forward to finally devour him. But this time, Liang Qiu wasn't helpless. With just a thought, the water twisted and surged, catching the beast mid-swim and suspending it in place. A rush of power filled him, an intoxicating feeling that made him realize, if he was underwater, he had no limits. But reality quickly set in. This power was new. He had only just awakened it, meaning his control was far from perfect. The beast struggled, breaking free from his grip. It lunged again, but with his newfound mobility, he easily dodged the attack, slipping through the water like it was second nature. Still, dodging alone wouldn't get him anywhere. Without a weapon, he needed another way to take this beast down. And just as that thought crossed his mind, the system responded. Turns out he wasn't just a simple waterbender, as he had other skill called blood domination. Through his own blood, he could inscribe ancient runes, forming a contract with aquatic spirit beasts, a revelation that made his pulse quicken, as this was exactly what he needed. And in just a second, he already had a plan. The moment the beast surged toward him again, he used water control, forcing it to stop just long enough to inscribe the necessary runes, creating a blood domination talisman. As soon as the beast broke free from his waterhold, he weaved around its massive form and slammed the talisman onto its head. But forming a contract was easier said than done. It was a battle of spiritual force. The beast fought back, lashing out with the intent to crush his very soul. His vision darkened, his body stiffened, and for a moment, it felt like the creature's will was completely overwhelming his own. But unfortunately for it, our boy had a soul that had lived twice, and with its combined strength, Liang Qiu was able to push back. His soul energy surged and overpowered the beast's resistance, and in the end he won. The contract was sealed, and thus, Liang Qiu floated back to the surface, breaking through the water with a deep, desperate inhale. The air filled his lungs, and for the first time since the whole ordeal began, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The beast emerged right after him, no longer an enemy, but an ally. Its massive form loomed over the lake. Its eyes locked onto Liang Qiu with a newfound reverence. It had fully submitted to him. Still, there was one problem. He couldn't exactly stroll back into the village with a big-ass water beast at his side. That would cause all kinds of problems, so he ordered it to stay behind. And thanks to their newly formed spiritual link, he could summon it whenever he needed, and vice versa. And with that, the beast disappeared into the depths, retreating to its hidden lair. A good place to lay low. And as for Liang Ku, it was time to get out of here. The next day, the old man who had thrown Liang Chu in as bait arrived at the village, dragging along his crew and Steward Zheng. They weren't here for condolences. Assuming Liang Ku was already dead, the old geezer had his sights set on something else. His father's fortune. In his mind, it was compensation for the botched mission. After all, their plan had failed, Zhao was dead, and someone had to pay for it. With that in mind, they marched straight to Liang Ku's house. The moment they reached the door, they kicked it wide open, expecting an empty room. Instead, they froze, because standing right there was Liang Ku. For a moment, the entire group just stared, dumbfounded. But that shock didn't last long. Steward Zheng's face twisted in pure rage towards the old geezer as he didn't check his facts right. But it didn't matter. The steward was already convinced that Liang Ku was responsible for botching the mission, and someone had to take the fall for it. So he didn't even hesitate ordering his men to restrain him and teach him a lesson. Apparently, Zhao's death wasn't just an inconvenience. It had cost Zheng a lot of money. Not to mention, the entire village was now in danger because the beast was still out there. And according to them, that was all Liang Ku's fault. Which obviously was complete bullshit. So Liang Ku refuted everything, pinning the real blame back onto the old man. But of course, the bastard was too cunning to let himself get cornered. Instead, he flipped the script, pointing out Liang Ku's miraculous survival. How could a brat possibly return alive unless he was working with the beast? And just like that, the accusation changed. Now Liang Ku wasn't just a troublemaker. He was a monster. He had controlled the water beast. He was responsible for Zhao's death. It was an absurd claim, but Liang Ku wasn't a stranger to being labeled a freak. In his previous life, he had been an orphan, so the kids in school looked at him like he was some bad omen, a walking misfortune. Rumors spread that orphans were cursed or had a habit of stealing, and no matter what he did, the stigma never left. But he wasn't about to roll over and take it, because he ain't bitch made. And if there was one thing he refused to let happen, it was getting pushed around, especially by someone uglier than him. This bastard was already missing a tooth, so Liang Ku decided to help him add a few more to the count. And now was no different. Even if it meant revealing his power, Liang Ku wasn't folding to these bastards. Not now. Not ever. So without hesitation, he tackled the old goose, shoving him back with enough force to send him stumbling, and locked onto the nearest basin of water. They wanted him to be a monster so bad? Fine. He'd show them what a real monster looked like. Water surged up his arm, twisting and coiling like a living serpent. His anger sharpened his focus, and for a moment, he was ready to take every single one of them to the grave. But just as he was about to unleash hell, his childhood friend appeared, rushing in alongside the village chief. The chief's voice cut through the chaos, carrying a weight that even Steward Zheng couldn't ignore. And even though the old man looked ancient, he was still an official of the dynasty, someone with real authority. That meant Zheng couldn't do shit. And so the steward had no choice but to comply. But before storming off, he shot the chief a glare filled with venom, as he assured them that his master Zhao would hear about this. But the old G wasn't fazed. He knew this was just a hollow threat, because even the steward's master would bow to him. After that, Liang Ku let out a slow breath, then turned to the village chief, giving him a nod of thanks. And with nothing else left to do, they left as well. But Liang Ku knew better. This wasn't the end. Situations like this would keep happening over and over, unless he did something about it. So he made a decision. If he wanted to survive in this world, he had to use his system to the fullest and get stronger, fast. That's when he noticed something strange. His water essence was increasing. First, he wasn't sure why, but then it clicked. His crocodile pet had something to do with it. Intrigued, he waited for nightfall before heading back to the lake, and then activated his spirit link to call out to his water beast. And when it finally surfaced, it was bite-sized, completely surprising Liang Ku, and he was about to start asking questions when the system chimed in, explaining that due to being subdued, contracted beasts can adjust their body size at will to manage energy consumption. And that actually made sense. But he wasn't here to admire his pet's new party trick. He wanted to know where this water essence was coming from. So, he commanded his little companion to show him the way. Immediately, the croc dived in and Liang Ku followed. The water beast led him deeper into the lake, weaving through the murky depths before slipping into a hidden underwater cave. The moment Liang Ku stepped inside, his eyes widened. Countless legendary spirit plants sprawled across the cave floor, glowing faintly with rich spiritual energy. He reached out, brushing his fingers against one, and immediately a system prompt popped up, giving him the option to absorb. This was a loot drop he wasn't about to pass up. In this world, spiritual materials and treasures absorbed extraordinary energies over time, making them incredibly valuable. Spirit plants, in particular, possessed unique effects depending on their properties. And rumor had it that in Zhao Manor's backyard, there was a frozen pond where special vines grew at the bottom. These vines were so rare and powerful that Master Zhao used them to lure cultivators into servitude. That's how precious they were. And yet, here he was, standing in a cave full of them. If he absorbed them, they'd definitely boost his water essence. Exactly what he needed. So without wasting any time, he got to work. He gathered everything he could. He considered asking his beast for help, but when he glanced over, the crock was already full, having eaten a few plants itself. It was already bloated and floating around. So he decided to let it rest. It earned a nap for leading him here. After gathering everything, Liang Qiu wasted no time. He started devouring the plants, and with just one plant, his water essence increased by 1. Not only that, these spirit plants were delicious, which made it way too easy for him to gobble them up one after another. And he kept eating, absorbing as much water essence as possible. The more he had, the better his fusion with aquatic spirits and the faster his aquatic beasts could evolve. And there were a lot of plants. So much so that for a moment, he became a fat ass. But it is worth it, as he had gained 25 water essence. Immediately, he invested it into his fusion with the water monkey bloodline, increasing it from 5% to 7.5, a significant boost in power. With this, he was confident that if he ever ran into those bastards from before, he could take them on easily. But that could wait. Right now, he had a more pressing issue, and that he is broke. And autumn was coming to an end, and during this season, crocodiles slowed down due to hibernation, meaning he couldn't rely on them for hunting when that time came. So the plan was simple. He needs to exploit them now and get as much profit as possible before they became useless. With that in mind, he had his croc hunt as many fish as it could, stacking up a huge haul, and selling them. And the merchants in this world weren't like the hustling vendors from his previous life. They were way easier to convince. And just like that, his financial struggles were covered. Now, he was on to the next step. It was time to settle things with that old geezer who tried to set him up. But before he could even make a move, the bastard set himself up perfectly. Apparently, the old man was trying to search for him to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier, and to show his sincerity, he invited Liang Qiu to a meal, on his boat, just the two of them, which made Liang Qiu nearly laughed out loud. It was so blatantly obvious what he was trying to do. But instead of calling him out, he played along, because this was exactly what he wanted. A few hours before the meetup, the old geezer was getting his ass handed to him. The steward's men had beaten him to a pulp for his failure. For the first time ever, the steward had been embarrassed in front of so many people, and he wasn't about to let that slide. But killing the old man now would be a waste. Their master Zhao still had use for him, because Zhao needed materials to refine his pills. And not just any materials. He needed a true orphan child. And so, the old geezer was to abduct Liang Qiu, to send a clear message that they were not to be messed with, and to secure the rare material Zhao needed. And if he did his job right, he was promised immortality. And that alone made him go absolutely crazy. Crazy enough to accept a power-boosting seal, something that would push his strength far beyond his limits, just for this one mission. With this, the old geezer felt confident that capturing Liang Qiu alive would be easy. But before resorting to brute force, he decided to take a smarter approach, and that is poison. The plan was simple. Lace the soup with a toxin that wouldn't kill. Just weaken Liang Qiu enough to keep him from screaming or resisting. Unfortunately for him, Liang Qiu had zero patience for that. Instead of taking a sip, he chose violence first. With a flick of his hand, a stream of water shot out, and before the old man could react, it wrapped around his head, suffocating him on the spot. He struggled, clawing at the invisible grip tightening around his face. But it was useless. He couldn't even scream if he wanted to. And then, everything went black. The next thing he knew, he was waking up to darkness. Night had fallen, his body ached, his mind spun, and the worst part, he was tied up. Immediately, he asked Liang Qiu what he was planning to do as if he was innocent. But Liang Qiu wasn't buying it. He already got the proof on his hand, and that the old man had been bribed. And with that, Liang Qiu knew exactly what to do. He had the perfect place for people like him, the same spot where they had first encountered the water beast. Except this time the beast belonged to him. The old man wanted him to be a monster so badly. Then he will give him what he wanted, Suddenly the guy had a change of heart. He realized he never wanted Liang Qiu to be a monster. So he apologized profusely and promised to tell him everything if he spare his life. Fortunately for him, Liang Qiu agreed, prompting the old man to spill everything, and that the steward wanted to abduct him. And not just him, other orphans as well. Because to the Zhao mansion, they weren't people. They were materials, used to refine a celestial pill, a pill that could grant immortality. And as soon as this info left from the old man's, he realized how bad it was that he was an accomplice, so to save his skin, he reasoned out that he was a victim too, and that he was only forced to do it. But unfortunately, Liang Qiu didn't care, forced or not. The old bastard already knew too much about him. That alone sealed his fate. No matter what excuse he gave, he wasn't leaving here alive. But that didn't mean he was safe. The Zhao family's influence wouldn't just sit idle. The old man's sudden disappearance would eventually lead them straight to him. And when that happened, he needed a way out. His only option now is to become a cultivator fast. The quickest way to do that is to join a martial arts school. In Pingyang City, there were 3 martial schools, but only one was the strongest. And that is the Yang School. It was said that the master of Yang School possessed a legendary ability, able to break gold and stone with his bare hands. That kind of power and reputation was what kept the school at the top. And if Liang Qiu could join them, then the Zhao family wouldn't dare to touch him so easily. Because if a member of the school disappeared, the Yang School wouldn't just let it slide. The problem now was the requirements. To get accepted, he needed at least 8 taels of silver, and right now, he only had 2, which meant it was time to make more money. With this in mind, he dove into the water to hunt again, and his swimming had improved a lot over the past few days, mostly thanks to his pet, which had become his sparring partner for speed training. Because of this, he developed a technique using his water control energy to compress water beneath his feet as much as possible before releasing it all at once. The problem was that it didn't last long and drained his energy way too fast, so he could only use it for a quick boost. But just when he thought things would go as usual, a peculiar fish appeared. It swam with a bright red glow, definitely a spiritual fish. In this world, some creatures could evolve under the influence of special energy, mutating in unexpected ways. Things like giant scorpion beetles, 2-headed razor-toothed sharks, or iron-fin whales were all prime examples. And right in front of him were 2 spiritual fish, an opportunity he couldn't afford to pass up. So he quickly ordered his croc to lock in, shifting back to its original size to chase one of the fish while he went after the other. With his new technique, he easily caught up, and using his water manipulation to create a bubble that stopped the fish from swimming. Just like that, he caught it without much trouble. But just as he was about to celebrate, something much stronger stirred in the depths. He had just placed the fish in his basket when a massive water beast wrapped around him and slammed him straight into the lake bed. That definitely startled him, but this wasn't the time to pass out. He locked in, only to realize it was the rumored 6-barbed fish that devoured people. And to make things worse, this son of a fish had tricks just like him, forming a massive water orb to attack. Unfortunately for it, Liang Qiu was way more powerful. He shattered the orb before it could even fully charge up, but that only pissed the beast off. It lashed out with its tail. Thankfully, the croc slid in just in time to intercept. And, before the beast could even recover, the croc hit it with a primary lotus special, slamming it straight into the ground. And that's where Liang Qiu came in to capture it with his blood talisman. But it seems like this water beast had way stronger spiritual energy than the croc, and that's when things got messy. Liang Qiu's body started spazzing out, and his system crashed with tons of warning messages about mental overload. But this was now or never. If he backed down, this beast would straight up eat them. So he persisted. His will to live was greater, and in the end, he managed to subdue it. Just like the croc, the beast instantly shrank into a chunky dude to conserve energy. And the best part? It could evolve into a tiger-head whale. Since it was already round and pudgy, he figured chunky was the perfect name. With that taken care of, he went to check on the loot, and sure enough, the croc had captured the other spiritual fish. He gave it a well-deserved head pat, feeling grateful. To celebrate, he decided to cook some fish for them. He also cooked a smaller spiritual fish to see if he could extract some water essence from it, and luckily he did. 18 points worth. That had him ecstatic. If a small spirit fish yielded that much, then a bigger one should give at least triple. That meant he could definitely break past a 10% fusion rate. But as tempting as it was, he also needed money to get into school. So for now, he held back and focused on getting that cash first. But that would be all for today, so tune in next time for more. In the previous chapter, our main guy Liang Qiu had reincarnated into another world, where he gained the power to manipulate water after his blood mixed with a mythical item, the water cauldron. And it wasn't just that his powers let him breathe underwater, he could also tame aquatic beasts. Using this advantage, he managed to tame a lazy croc and a big-ass fish that he gladly named Chonky. But his status as an orphan had caught the attention of the Zhao Manor, a place notorious for targeting orphans to make pills that could supposedly turn someone into an immortal. With this, he decided to become a cultivator to fight back. And to do that, he needed money to enroll in a martial arts school. So he made up his mind to sell the fish he caught. Now on to the next part. Liang Qiu had just entered the Yixing market, where tons of people had gathered to buy goods. He had come here to sell his spiritual fish, confident that this was the perfect place to attract the right customers. But even so, he was still caught off guard by the sheer number of people packed into the marketplace, making him wonder if there was some kind of celebration going on. And that's when he spotted a man holding up another spiritual fish. It didn't take long to figure out what was happening. A member of the Chen family had just arrived, and apparently, he had brought his own spiritual fish to show off, so that's why the crowd was this massive. But instead of feeling discouraged, Liang Qiu only grew more excited. This was the perfect opportunity. So, without wasting a second, he pushed his way through the crowd, eager to see what the guy had caught. And of course, he wasn't here just to spectate. He was a master manipulator. So the moment he got close, he made sure to use his limelight, proudly displaying the spirit fish he had caught. But to his surprise, instead of drawing excitement, the crowd reacted with confusion. It wasn't met with awe, but with outright rejection. People started saying it didn't look like a spiritual fish at all, just some ugly, deformed creature that only a clueless newbie would bother catching. And before he knew it, the mockery began. The crowd didn't hold back, openly laughing at him. Even the Chen guy, the so-called expert in spirit fish, was smirking like he was watching a fool embarrass himself. But that's when a cultivator arrived, instantly drawing the attention of the crowd. It was Hu Qi, a respected master from the Yang martial arts school, and since Chen was standing closer, the cultivator's gaze naturally fell on the crimson bloodfish in his hands. Without hesitation, he asked for the price. And since Chen recognized the man's high status, he wasn't about to throw out a number himself. Instead, he humbly let cultivator decide what he thought was fair, and with that, Qi casually offered 3 taels. The moment the words left his mouth, immediately, this got Chen tweaking as this amount was way more than he ever expected. But just as the deal was about to wrap up, Liang Qiu suddenly whipped out his own fish for the cultivator to see. The onlookers, still riding high on their mockery, thought he was just setting himself up for humiliation. Some even chuckled, convinced he was about to get completely shut down. Except, the cultivator's reaction was the complete opposite. The moment his eyes landed on the creature, he was excited. He identified it as a horned pomfret, a rare and highly valued spirit fish, and just like that, he immediately offered 6 liangs for it. With this, the entire market was shocked. They were actually dead wrong, and that amount of money was more than what most families could save in generations. Now they realized who the stupid one was, and that definitely wasn't Liang Qiu. Even Chen, who had just been basking in his own success, was left speechless. No amount of arrogance could cover the fact that Liang Qiu had just outshined him completely. But with this amount of money, shock turned to envy. One guy in the crowd even had the nerve to make a veiled threat against Liang Qiu, disguising it as a joke. But Liang Qiu didn't mind it at all, and simply went on with the transaction, completely unbothered by the stares. And with that, Chen had no choice but to back away, knowing full well that his fish was no longer of any interest to the cultivator. But before he could give the fish, Liang Qiu, being smart, saw an opportunity. He decided to dig for more information. If his fish was worth double the price of a crimson bloodfish, he wanted to know why. So he casually asked the cultivator about it, and luckily for him, Hu Qi was in a good mood and didn't mind explaining. It turned out that this particular fish was a key ingredient in medicine used to craft special pills. These pills weren't just any ordinary supplements. They strengthened essence and refined energy, helping cultivators break through the blood flow barrier, a crucial stage in martial cultivation. And as fate would have it, Hu Qi was currently at that exact bottleneck, making this fish extremely useful to him. With this, Liang Qiu's perspective widened. He had only been thinking about selling fish for money, but now, he realized their true value in cultivation. This was huge. Grateful for the insight, he sincerely thanked the cultivator, knowing that this knowledge would serve him well in the future. A little while later, Liang Qiu sat in an alley, counting his money, when someone appeared behind him. It was Libo, his childhood friend who had come looking for him after hearing about what had happened. He then congratulated Liang Qiu for bringing pride to their village, something Liang Qiu definitely appreciated. But since the opportunity was right in front of him, he also took a moment to thank Libo for bringing the village chief when he needed help. And as a friend, Libo couldn't help but tease him, saying that if he was really that grateful, he should hand over the 6 tael of silver he just gotten from his sale. And obviously, Liang Qiu ignored that completely, and instead got straight to the point, asking how much it actually cost to enroll in the Yang Martial Arts School, which to his surprise made Libo really excited, especially since his father was just about to send him there as well. The school charged 7 tael of silver for basic enrollment without lodging or meals, 10 tael if those were included, and 20 tael if one wanted to add medicinal baths to their training. It was pricier than the other 2 academies, but it was also the most prestigious, which made it worth it. Which Liang could think as well, so he couldn't help but smile as he could definitely enter the school with his budget, with everything he had earned over the past few days. He had gathered 9 tael of silver in total, so without hesitation, he told Libo they could sign up together tomorrow. Which excited him even more since the timing worked out perfectly for both of them. But just as the moment felt right, their excitement was cut short, as Liang Qiu's passive ability suddenly activated, sharpening his senses in a way that sent a chill down his spine. He could overhear conversations of people nearby, as long as they were also close to a water source. And this time, the voices came from none other than the Zhao Manor. What he heard made his stomach drop. They weren't just talking about something random, they were specifically tracking him down. And this was bad, absolutely bad. If they were already onto him, he needed to power up, fast. So, without wasting another second, as soon as night fell, Liang Qiu returned to the lake. And to his surprise, Chunky had managed to catch another spirit fish. So, without wasting any time, he decided to eat it. But he wasn't some brute who just devoured things raw. Instead, he cooked it properly, adding some seasoning and making a soup out of it. And the result was absolutely amazing. The flavors blended together so well that even just the soup alone filled his mouth with an unbelievably rich taste. And his pets were practically drooling from the aroma, eyes locked on the fine meal in front of them. Fortunately for them, Liang Qiu wasn't the type to keep good food all to himself. He generously shared portions with his companions, making sure everyone got their fill. And with that, both the meal and the rewards were satisfying. This spirit fish granted him 24 water essence, far greater than the horned pomfret, which had only given him 18. With this, he immediately used it to refine his power, and just as he expected, the energy surging through him was much stronger than before. His fusion had now reached nearly 12%, making him itch for a good fight just to see how much he had actually improved. But that wasn't all. His water control had grown considerably too. If he wanted to, he could even lift this chonky little guy high into the air without breaking a sweat. But as he glanced at his beast, something else caught his attention. Their evolution requirements seems to have dropped, and the only thing he did was feed them, and it had decreased from 800 to 779. That was insane. This was an incredible realization. The water cauldron was turning out to be even more valuable than he first thought, which made him question its origins. Was it a product of nature, or the creation of something greater? The answer had to lie within the cauldron itself, so he summoned it for a closer look, and to his surprise, he noticed something interesting. The carving showed a water monkey engraved on one side, but also a winged dragon on the other, along with other strange creatures, one with a human head and a snake's body, plus a mysterious figure cloaked in a robe. This could give him a clue on what it truly holds. But that was just all speculation. He didn't want to get ahead of himself just yet. Overthinking wouldn't do him any good right now. He needed to focus, especially since he was about to enroll in a martial arts school tomorrow. And just like that, the next day arrived. The two of them were now traveling through the mountains in a carriage, and if Liang Qiu had to be honest, Libo's boundless enthusiasm was already making him question whether he should have just gone to school alone. The younger one was practically bouncing in his seat, way too excited for the ride. A little while later, they arrived at Pinyang City, a bustling hub where people from different villages gathered to trade their goods. The streets were packed, the air buzzing with chatter and the scent of freshly cooked street food. There was so much to see that the two couldn't help but get swept up in the atmosphere, deciding to take a quick detour and explore. They tried out different foods, checked out handcrafted art that was unlike anything they were used to, and even stumbled upon a rather bizarre show of strength. A man lying flat on bricks while some buff guy hammered him with his thing. A truly shocking sight, to say the least. Meanwhile, as they wandered through the city, a group of men was busy plotting something far less entertaining. They had been eyeing Liang Ku's money for a while now, and had originally planned to rob him the day before. But after overhearing that he and Libo were headed to the Yang Martial Arts School, they realized there was an even bigger opportunity. 2 bags of money instead of 1. That thought alone had them practically salivating. Even if they sold their wives, they wouldn't come close to seeing that kind of wealth. So the idea of taking it for themselves was far too tempting to pass up. Still, some of them hesitated. With that much money, they could easily get into trouble with the magistrate's office if they were caught. But their leader shut down their worries, grinning as he assured them that things wouldn't get that far. He would take care of the bodies himself. And besides, no one would ever find out. The 2 kids would definitely take the shortest route to the school, a shortcut barely anyone used. It was the perfect spot for an ambush. And just as they had predicted, the 2 finally appeared. So, without wasting a second, the gang stepped out to intercept them. Blocking their path with smug grins, they demanded money, making it clear that Liang Ku and Libo had only 2 options: hand it over willingly, or end up buried by the roadside. They even laughed as they said it, as if this was all some sick joke. Unfortunately for them, the joke was about to be on them, because Liang Ku wasn't laughing. No, he had a different kind of smile, a devious one, as he made his decision. If they were so eager to bury someone by the roadside, then he'd gladly grant them their wish. They were about to eat that curve instead. But that would be all for today, so tune in next time for more. In the previous chapter, Liang Ku headed to the market to sell his spirit fish, where he crossed paths with Master Hu, a disciple of the Yang sect, who bought his fish for a hefty sum, exactly what Liang Ku needed to enroll in the Yang Martial Arts School. But having that much money also made him a prime target for greedy bastards who thought he'd be easy to rob. So when he and his best friend were on their way to join the Yang sect, those thugs showed up, thinking they could scare them into handing over the money. Unfortunately for them, Liang Ku had been itching for a fight, so he doubled down with mockery. Now on to the next part. The thugs were immediately pissed, so they didn't hesitate to jump him. But Liang Ku instantly appeared in front and quickly landed that right hook even before they could finish winding up. And our boy was just that fast that he caught sight of the second guy still mid-motion, and without missing a beat, he slammed his elbow right into that idiot's face. And oh, he wasn't stopping there. Before the guy could even drop to the ground, Liang Ku grabbed him by the hair like he was his personal bitch and hurled him straight into their leader. That poor bastard stood there dumbfounded, completely unprepared for the kind of power coming from someone who looked like just another kid. But before he could even process what was happening, Liang Ku's fist had already found its mark, smashing his face straight into the ground like he was planting a damn tree. And he did it so brutally too, because judging by the way that guy's neck was bent, there was no way a mortal would survive that. And the funniest part? Liang Ku hadn't even meant to go that hard. He was just as shocked as his friend. This was his first real fight since leveling up, and now there was no doubt. His physical abilities had skyrocketed along with his water-bending powers. Still, seeing what he had just done, his friend couldn't hold back his curiosity. When the hell had Liang Ku become this strong? For as long as he'd known him, he'd never seen him display this kind of power. Did he even need a master at this point? But since spilling the truth wasn't an option, Liang Ku just shrugged it off with the lamest excuse imaginable. Apparently, he was a genius all along. And that was that. They needed to get moving since they were already running out of time for school. Of course, his friend wasn't buying that nonsense for a second. He knew Liang Ku well enough to know that genius was the last word anyone would use to describe him. But if he didn't want to open up just yet, then fine. He wasn't going to push it. He'd just respect his decision, for now. With that, they continued their journey to Yang sect, and soon arrived at its doorstep, where they were greeted by a senior disciple named Xiang. As a formality, they returned the greeting, and with that out of the way, Xiang led them inside, guiding them toward another instructor who would oversee their test and explain what it meant to be a member. This brought them to Senior Hu, a direct disciple of Master Yang. And no, not that ordinary-looking dude, but the one with the luxurious hair. The same man Liang Ku had met at the market, the one who had bought his fish. To his surprise, Hu immediately recognized him, which caught Xiang off guard. Seeing his confusion, Hu casually explained how he had met the junior before, and that small twist of fate made Xiang rather pleased. It meant skipping lengthy introductions and getting straight to business. And so, the important part was settled. From now on, the juniors would be under senior brother Hu's guidance, and for tonight they were allowed to stay in the martial hall. With that sorted, they thanked Xiang and formally greeted Senior Hu, which he acknowledged their respect, but made it clear he didn't have all day. He was a busy man. So, without wasting time, He got straight to the task and instructed them to follow him so he could test their bone structure. And that wasn't something they had been expecting, so they hesitated, which made Senior Hu laugh at how anxious they looked, and so he reassured them that there was nothing to worry about. This was simply his way of determining which cultivation path suited them best. And that was definitely new to these province boys, but Liang Qiu wasn't about to stay ignorant. So he seized this opportunity and asked his senior to explain the principles behind this cultivation path he was talking about. Thankfully, Hu was a teacher at heart, and without a moment's hesitation, he began explaining. Martial arts were divided into 4 stages. Skin barrier hardened the body like oxhide, making the skin tough and resilient, greatly enhancing defense. Flesh barrier strengthened the muscles, allowing a person to lift a grown man with one hand as if it were nothing. Bone barrier unleashed power even more recklessly, making it possible to shatter stone and split monuments. Blood barrier was the final refinement, an all-around enhancement, like embroidery on silk, reinforcing every aspect of the body. At its core, martial cultivation boiled down to one thing, and that is refinement. But for ordinary people, no matter how much they refined their bodies, there was always a limit. And to break past that limit, 2 things were indispensable: technique and medicine. Looking at his juniors, he could see them full of questions what he meant by that. So he went ahead and gave them an example. He brought up Yang Martial Hall's 3-fist technique. With the right technique, a cultivator could climb upward like stepping onto a stairway to ascend. But that path was steep and treacherous. To climb faster and more steadily, one needed a handrail, and that handrail was medicine. Just like the bullhorn pomfret that Liang Qiu had sold to him, that fish was exactly the kind of resource cultivators needed for their refinement. And at that moment a realization dawned on Liang Qiu, one that both enlightened and delighted him. With his pets by his side, gathering these medicines wouldn't be a problem at all. He was practically set for life. And Senior Hu could already tell from their expressions that their minds were racing with possibilities, likely already planning how to take advantage of this newfound knowledge. But before they got too ahead of themselves, he reminded them to take it slow. The martial path was long, and rushing would only lead to setbacks. They needed to focus on each step, one at a time, an advice they were grateful for, and with that, they resumed the test, ready to have their bone structures examined. Meanwhile, off to the side, a troublesome group led by Yang Tai from the same sect had locked eyes on Liang Qiu, and from the way they carried themselves, it was obvious. They were lackeys of the 3rd young master of the Zhao Manor, Zhao Shuiyuan. This guy had taken quite a liking to Liang Qiu, and as long as Yang Kai and his followers managed to get rid of him and his friend from the sect, Shuiyuan had promised to grant them whatever they wanted. But the real reason Shuiyuan was so fixated on Liang Qiu wasn't just personal interest. The truth was, the Zhao Manor wasn't actually making pills to achieve immortality, at least not in the way people assumed. Instead, they were producing pills to heal Shuiyuan. His older brother, Master Zhao, believed Liang Qiu was the perfect material for refining elixirs, mainly because he was the same age as Shuiyuan. And since Shuiyuan had been frail since childhood, finding a fetal pill from someone of the same age was becoming increasingly difficult. Liang Qiu was the ideal candidate. The problem was that the brat had joined the Yang sect, which meant capturing him would be a whole lot harder. So they needed to find another target, one that wouldn't be missed. So Master Zhao had more or less given up on the idea. But unfortunately, Shuiyuan himself had overheard everything, and there was no way he was going to let some orphan kid stand in his way. Instead of waiting around, he decided to step in personally. If he handled this himself, things would become much easier, and soon he would finally break his shackles and push through to his elixir aperture. Meanwhile, the two had finished checking their bone structures, but Libo was still in shock, completely flabbergasted even. The fact that Liang Qiu had a top-tier bone structure while he himself only ranked at mid-high tier was just unacceptable. So he was entertaining the idea that the test must have been rigged, which he knows it wouldn't be. But he can't help but feel that way. He had always believed they were equals, but now it seemed like he was just some side character in his best friend's story. Still, this wasn't the time to get discouraged, so he pushed those thoughts aside and pressed on. With that settled, the two were about to head to the training grounds when they ran into a familiar face. It was Chen Jiecheng, the same guy who had been selling spirit fish with Liang Qiu the other day. But from the way Libo immediately stepped forward and started sizing him up, it was clear that he had more history with this guy than Liang Qiu did. The bad blood was obvious, and within seconds the two were already on the verge of fighting right then and there. Which, of course, Liang Qiu couldn't allow. If they actually started throwing punches, they'd be in serious trouble. So he stepped in and shut it down before things could get out of hand. Once the tension cooled off, he asked if Yishang was here to practice martial arts too, which he confirmed, and as it turned out, he and Liang Q had the same goal from the very beginning. He had been selling spirit fish just to save up enough money to enter the school as soon as possible. Which was reassuring. The more people with the same determination, the better. So Liang Q wasted no time inviting him to join them, especially when Senior Hu was teaching at the training grounds already, and they couldn't afford to miss such an opportunity. With that in mind, they joined the other members for training, but since they were still new, it felt like their bodies were literally ascending straight into the afterlife. The sheer intensity of the training was far beyond anything they had expected. Their muscles spasmed like crazy, their limbs felt like jelly, and their breaths came in ragged gasps. Thankfully, just when they were about to collapse, Senior Hu finally called for a break, sparing them from completely giving in. But the training wasn't over yet. Instructor Lu would be taking over in the afternoon, meaning they had only a brief moment to recover before they got thrown right back into the grind. At this point, Libo was already considering quitting, because seriously, this was absolute torture. He wasn't built for this level of pain, which of course made Chen burst into laughter, calling him weak-willed without hesitation. But before they could even properly catch their breath, trouble arrived as Yang Tai and his lackeys started pestering them right away, throwing insults, acting like they owned the place. But that wasn't even the worst part. These guys actually had the audacity to demand 100 coins from them as a donation, claiming that if they paid up, they'd be allowed to stay in the sect. Which was straight up ridiculous. Who did they think they were? Even Senior Hu never treated them like this. And so Libo was ready to throw hands on the spot. Despite knowing his skills weren't exactly on par with theirs, he didn't care. He just wanted the satisfaction of punching at least one of these guys in the face. But before he could make a move, the more level-headed Chen stopped him. Since picking a fight here wouldn't just be reckless, it'd cause unnecessary trouble for Senior Hu, which was the last thing they needed. Even Liang Q hesitated. He wasn't the type to back down, but with his current strength, he wasn't sure if he could handle 3 cultivators at once. And just as he feared, Yang Kai took this moment to boast, loudly declaring that he was about to break through the skin barrier, which of course meant he was itching to test it out on some newbies like them. This was definitely a fight they couldn't win. If only they were near a river. Then Liang Ku would have had a fighting chance. But in their current state, there was no way. This was a losing battle from the start. Thankfully, Senior Hu decided to come back and check up on the newbies, putting a stop to the nonsense before it could escalate any further. Not only did he shut down the confrontation, but he also made sure Yang Chai and his lackeys were punished for their antics, which only made Yang Chai hate them even more. So they throw out empty threats before finally backing down. But of course, this action didn't sit well with Senior Hu. He wasn't playing around. So, just for that, he made sure their punishment was greater. But things weren't as easy as it seemed. As they left, Liang Ku caught something through his passive skill, something that immediately put him on edge. Someone nearby was talking about him, and from the tone of their voice, it was obvious they were still targeting him. Even after he had joined the Yang sect, they weren't giving up, and worse, they sounded desperate, which wasn't a good sign. Because if they were this persistent, it meant they wouldn't hesitate to strike when he was vulnerable. And if they did, his friends could end up getting caught in the crossfire. He didn't have time to hesitate, so without explaining much, he quickly told the others that he had something to take care of and would be heading home for a bit in the afternoon. And just bolted out of there. He plans to go the Lotus Pond where he has the advantage and where there'd be no witnesses to see what he was about to unleash. But that would be all for today, so tune in next time for more.